Bienvenidos a un capítulo más de Diálogos Sensoriales. Hoy tenemos el honor de contar con una eminencia en la psicología de la percepción y del comportamiento alimentario. Nos acompaña el doctor John Prescott, el autor del libro Taste Matters y experto en entender por qué nos gusta lo que comemos. John, welcome to Diálogos Sensoriales, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's truly an honor to have you here.
Hola. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Okay, let's start with a small question that is why and how did you start your journey into the sensory field?
Well, it's not through the straightforward way that many people did. So I never studied food science. My background was in experimental psychology, and of course, human perception is an important part of experimental psychology. But I had no contact with food at all until postdoctorally I joined an organisation in Australia called CSIRO, and they are the government scientific organisation, and they had a big department of food science and technology, and they wanted people. They already had a group studying sensory aspects of foods. I joined them and was very lucky, I think, to join them. There was already a very big project going on where we were studying food preferences cross-culturally, particularly in Japan. And I worked with two colleagues, David Lang and Graham Bell, who were, well-established researchers in the field of mainly studying taste and smell, from basic aspects of taste and smell, but also very applied aspects. And we extended, as I say, from really fundamental research all the way up to undertaking commercial studies for industry. And so that was, I don't know, 30 years ago plus.
Wow. And inside that journey, you had the opportunity to work with many people. Do you have like some contacts that it was really a pleasure to work with, or somebody who fit, let's say, that sparkle into the sensory field?
Well, look, I've got to say everybody I work with has been fantastic in different ways, one way or another. And I was anxious then you were going to ask me about people who I hated working with, but
Not yet, not
but no,
yet.
there hasn't been really any of those. My first collaboration was with, well, the first influences really, rather than formal collaboration, was with people at the Monmouth Chemical Senses Center in the United States, people like Barry Green. So my initial interest was to do with the trigeminal sense, so chemisthesis and oral pungency and so on. And he was the biggest name and in that field, and I went to visit him. He was very generous and around about the same time, I got to know people like Harry Lawless, who already was very well known in the food sensory field. So from him, I guess I received some inspiration about practical aspects of sensory evaluation and so on. So I was really not juggling, I was happy to have parallel courses of basic research and applied research going on at the same time. Since then, look, I've had very, very many collaborations and they've all been influential on me and have always been, a great opportunity for me. And I hope it's given something back to my collaborators as well. But people like Ep Costa, and of course, Ep Costa, who died relatively recently, was an enormous influence in the field for many decades. So Ep Costa, I had colleagues in France and England and South Korea and so on. I continue to do collaborations now, and in fact, I must say, I now realize collaborating with other people is the best way to go to be into science. It's easy to become isolated in your own little sort of domain or your own particular area. and that nobody else is working in. But that's not where the real pleasure lies, or the real degree of output, significant output lies either.
Yeah, nowadays it's easy to collaborate with multicultural or other areas inside the same research or companies. So how easy was at the beginning? I mean, psychology is something that is very important in the, let's say, technical part of sensory, but how easy was for you to mix with those uh, technicians who deals with food and those methodologies?
Well, it was pretty easy, really, in the sense that everybody who works in sensory evaluation is really just applying psychology to food
Mhm.
or non-food, whatever you're
Right.
working in. So all the techniques are based on, signal detection theory, or they're based on notions of thresholds, discrimination, thresholds, and so on, ratings of intensity. All this derives from experimental psychology. Uh, it's not taught that way particularly in food science departments. I think I'm fairly critical of the way it's taught because it's seen as sort of a toolbox, and people get no understanding of the theoretical background of the techniques they're using. But nevertheless, it's all just applied psychology. Well, it's not just applied psychology; it is applied psychology.
Right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I had to learn, and I can honestly say I don't know that much. I had to learn about food per se, and about, all my colleagues who were food scientists, of course, all knew about, flavor chemistry and things like that. And I can't honestly say I still know very much about that, but that is important too.
Yeah, totally agree. Nowadays, it's like a claim that's saying that you need to be in a nice environment to enjoy your food or be with somebody to get connected with the food, in fact, or whatever product. But uh, how did you study that? I mean, now we have immersion room or computers and etc. But at that time, how easy was to do that?
Well, when I first started, we're talking about the 1990s. When I first started, actually, people were looking at these sorts of issues about context in
Mhm.
its various forms, expectations, and so on. That these were topics that have been ongoing for a good many decades now. But as you say, we didn't have the sort of elaborate, environments that you could set up. Um, so I think it's really a matter of just increasing sophistication over the years. And but I think, even from its earliest days, I think people recognise that the context was all important. And again, if you look at particularly studies in experimental psychology of learning, um, rat psychology, as they call it. The whole idea of context is incredibly important, even to understand basic principles of learning. So that's always been the issue, but yeah, it's become sophisticated. These things have a habit of going in cycles and becoming fashionable for a while, and then becoming less fashionable. But at the moment, as you say, people want to look at immersive environments as a way of, I mean, let's be blunt about it, as a way of compensating for the fact that ratings of liking don't tell us anything. You know, the
I
the
know.
the the initial approach was to say, well, okay, so we need to ask about liking, but we need to give people information about the product or
Right.
vary the information systematically. That was the way it was done originally, and now it's about asking about liking in complex environments. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't.
Yeah, and emotions also, it's everything is related to emotions, maybe. And I mean, if you ask somebody in a room about a whatever product, you need to provide them context, but they are like I don't know, maybe nervous because they have a camera or they are very nervous, so that let's say, pollute the evaluation. I mean, it's something we need to be aware of, the emotions.
Yeah. I think so. Well, as you know, that emotions has taken off for the last, I guess, about 15 years. I did a quick survey of food quality and preference papers a year or so ago, and looked at when we started to first get in the journal the first papers on emotions. It wasn't that long ago, and again, I would, and I'm not sure everybody agrees with me on this. In fact, I know they don't. I think the enthusiasm for emotions is born out of the, again, recognition that the other measures we're using simply are not very good at predicting actual food choices. And the hope is that if you add emotions, then that will improve it. And there's some evidence for optimism. Sometimes you see products differentiated by emotions that aren't differentiated by liking measures. So that's interesting. I would again argue, I think that there is perhaps too much enthusiasm about emotions without having really understood what emotions are and what they aren't, and what constitutes an emotion. And so people use checklists of emotions without really, I think, delving into the question of, why use these particular emotions on this checklist? Why not other emotions? Are all these words necessarily emotions? Are they synonyms for emotions? There are lots and lots of issues that I think we need to keep in mind when using emotions. And similarly, I think that what constitutes an emotion, what can we measure as an emotion, I think is problematic. So, for example, people look at facial expressions, and we know that facial expressions aren't a good or reliable indicator of an emotion. Physiological measures also not reliable measure of emotion. But people are, I think, scrambling to find what they call objective measures.
Right. What is the biggest change you have seen in the psychological area applied into sensory within these years? It's an adaptation, or it's a huge change in the psychologist field?
Well, I think so. I mean, a couple of things. One is sort of methodological, and that is that people now recognize that, if we're looking at consumers in particular, then, consumers vary in all sorts of important ways. Now, marketers have been using segmentation of consumers forever. So men, women, urban, non-urban, age-related and so on. But I think the big not breakthrough, but I guess the change in emphasis has been to say, well, actually, there are a lot of variables that we haven't been looking at that should be. And many of these are psychological, things like personality measures. Some are physiological. So I was involved I guess I still am, involved in research on bitterness sensitivity, and which varies, as you know, quite dramatically amongst people. Some people are extremely bitter sensitive, others not. And that has been shown to have quite a big impact on preferences for certain foods. So there's individual differences like that. There's the fact that, one of my areas I work in at the moment is food neophobia. And that's an enormous influence on the foods that people will eat, or in fact on their whole diet. Food neophobia is a big predictor of, whether you have a healthy diet or not, for example. So, and there, one can add countless other measures, which is part of the problem in a way that you can always come up with different measures. There's the 3-factor eating questionnaire. There's there's measures of extroversion, introversion. There's all sorts of things, which suddenly makes at least the consumer science field very complex if you're to understand the consumer choices properly. The other thing it does is it suddenly makes the studies much bigger, enormously so. I've been fortunate to work with colleagues in Italy who did the Italian Taste Project, and their study contained about 3,500 people because you had multiple measures, lots of measures of all sorts, and something like 23 different laboratories working together across Italy to collect data. A bit like epidemiology, it's now recognizing that if you collect, data on humans, then you better collect lots of data on lots of humans. Yeah.
And what is, in your opinion, a good area of opportunity for companies that are making now this consumer testing? I know you already mentioned bigger examples, but normally they are in a hurry. They have like budget restrictions. So thinking on that, what will be a good area of opportunity for them?
Well, that's a difficult question. I do think that these sort of rapid studies that companies do are in a sense motivated by the need to, well, we'd better do this just in case,
Right.
rather than being planned. Let's just check if our product is acceptable. Well, who knows whether it's got anything to do with sales or not. As I was saying a few minutes ago, that you can ask people about which products they prefer, which ones they like. There's not any evidence really that translates to sales. It tells you what they won't buy. Let's be generous. It tells you what they won't buy. So if you have a product that gets very low ratings of liking or similar, it suggests that there's something wrong with the product, at least relative to other products on the market. So that's a worthwhile thing. That's not, but then it becomes so complex. It's a complex human behavior we're trying to predict.
Yeah.
And I think the new methods of using AI are going to be increasingly important in that, because you can actually crunch a whole lot of data. It sort of means that there might be less reliance on the typical sensory study in the future. And I think that once you've got AI models working on purchasing behavior, and you can discriminate the products along various parameters, then you're going to start to be able to predict the parameters that are important for people, and focus on them. I don't think it means the death of the typical sensory study. I think it means it's going to change, at least when collecting data on consumers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important because sometimes we try something, let's say today, and we don't like it, but we try it tomorrow and then we like it, or several times, and then sometimes yes, or the majority we like that product. How can we know if there is a magic number of trials in order to be confident that I really like that product?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There's a general principle, and that is we can all get to like anything. You go to another country, particularly which has differences in culture from your own, and the foods that people eat are just seem outrageous. I always use the example of the rotten Greenland shark that Scandinavian people eat. I mean, to me, that just would be the worst thing in the world, and I can't imagine it for a moment. And we all know terrible examples from other countries, but that tells us something. It tells us that, in fact, we can learn to like anything. It's just due to exposure, okay?
Right, right.
Because we have inbuilt mechanisms, physiological mechanisms, and general cognitive learning mechanisms that enable liking to grow with multiple exposures, and that's just a general thing. What we do know is, if we're talking about testing, that we do know that if you test a product once, you will get a result which is not reliable if you test it again a month later. And so multiple tests is probably, a way of stabilizing those sorts of measures. However, given what I've just said, multiple tests with the same consumers, the same group of people, actually changes the level of liking. So you can't. It's a bit like the sort of Heisenberg idea. You can't, or is it somebody else? Anyway, no, you can't observe a phenomenon without influencing the phenomenon, and so there is a slight bind there for testing consumer preferences, but maybe that's okay. Maybe you want to know what happens when people taste things a few times. I think most people do that, don't they? They are influenced to taste something once by various means, advertising, for example. If it's not terrible, well, it's not worse than another product of the same type, they might try it again. And so it's that process of retrying that is, well, it's what companies want for a start, but it's also the process whereby a product becomes, part of your life, at least for a while. And particularly, as Eb Costa did tell us, that particularly if the product is a complex product. So we've always got this idea of, increasing liking through exposure, but it depends upon the complexity of the product. Simple products are the ones we get bored with. Complex products are the ones we go on to like more and more.
It's like this acquired taste, no? In the case of whiskey, for instance, or beer,
Yeah.
or even in
Yeah.
coffee, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And why would any of us drink coffee? I mean, it's a nasty, bitter liquid. So is beer.
Yeah.
It is. And yet, we know, why would anybody eat an oyster?
Wow, a good example.
As they say, the first person was very brave,
Right.
but it's purely exposure, and that exposure can be reinforced by advertising or the image that's put around a product. And that, for some things like, as you say, whiskey or wine or coffee, that image can be very, very strong. It's a mark of sophistication, and it's what everybody does, and one can appreciate the finer aspects of it. So there are stories that people tell around certain types of products which help us overcome any barriers like bitterness.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So that's the context, part of the context, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a big part.
Okay. Let's move to another part of the interview where I will ask you some 2 AFC questions. Just let me know which one do you prefer. For example,
Okay.
red wine or white wine?
For me, white wine.
Uh,
Unless I can have a couple of aspirin with the red wine.
okay, good to know. 9 points or 7 point scale for consumer testing?
Doesn't really matter.
Okay. I hope
But we have a 9-point scale that's been used forever. Why not use that? Potentially more discrimination, but compared to some other consumer scales, not very much discrimination at all. But yeah.
Thank you. Marmite or Vegemite?
Oh, look, I might as well drink the oil in my car, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
I don't eat either.
Okay. Tetra testing or triangle test?
Look, my understanding is, and I've not done work on this myself, but the tetrad test seems to be more discriminating. Why wouldn't you use it?
Okay.
But having said that, the other thing, it's always a balance, isn't it? Between, okay, you want to find the smallest difference you can, but then you can simply ask, well, is the smallest difference the difference you want to find?
Correct. Traditional descriptive analysis or rapid methods?
Yeah, it's horses for courses, as they say, isn't it? Really, it's again, we can see that the outcome of one is, a profile that's done quickly, great. Okay, if time is your key, parameter, well, that's the one to use. If you've got much more time, then I think, people who are highly trained, on a particular product, of course, can discriminate it dramatically if that's something you want.
Yeah. It depends on the objective. Okay.
Exactly.
Coffee or tea?
This is a complicated one. For me, tea,
Okay.
but when I'm in Italy,
Ah,
coffee.
okay. Nice. Analytical or consumer testing?
Uh, well, it's like, apples or oranges, isn't it?
Right.
It doesn't mean anything. Look, here's the thing. It I'm a great believer that you can use consumers for all sorts of things. We don't have that strict dichotomy that Mike O'Mahony had laid down all those years ago. You can use consumers to describe products if you give them a sufficient uh, vocabulary. The other thing you can use consumers for is to discriminate products from one another. They're actually pretty good at that if they're familiar with the product. Uh, so there is not the hard and fast rules that I think many of us grew up with. But generally speaking, obviously, a descriptive panel can't tell you about liking. Well, they can, of course, but it doesn't mean anything.
Understood. Yeah. London rain or Sydney sun?
Well, if we're talking about weather, I'll take Sydney. Thank you,
Okay.
thank you very much. But I've got to tell you, when it rains in Sydney, it really rains.
Okay. Never been
It
there.
can be we can have very in summer we can have very tropical days.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Uh, Parametric or non-parametric statistics?
depends on the data.
Okay. Warm English ale or cold Australian late lager?
I'll have the ale, please. I'm not a great beer drinker, but lager is not a. I don't think I occasionally drink it if it's a hot day, but I think the ale has much more flavour.
Okay. And a preference mapping or partial least square, PLS?
Bloody hell! Go and ask a statistician.
Okay, no, it's more like to know your opinion, but that's it. I agree. It depends always.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, teaching or research?
Look, I like both. I must say, I've been a researcher most of my career, although I've had teaching positions and I've taught sensory evaluation to food scientists and perception to psychology students and so on. Look, I think if you're a teacher, you need to be a researcher.
Hmm.
You can't be a good teacher without being a researcher. You you need that. It's absolutely important. You can be a researcher without being a teacher, but I think actually, if you're primarily a researcher, actually being a teacher helps you also. It helps you clarify your
Right.
ideas, and it's the same as imagine if you're a researcher, you have ideas, you want to talk to people about them to get your ideas straight. There's no better way of doing that than talking in front of a bunch of people who don't understand anything,
Mhm.
and you have to get your ideas in a form that people can understand. So we should aim to be both.
Okay, great. Thank you for your answers. Let's move to the final part of the interview, and now let's move to this question that Well, you have an article of this, but and people said that there are two kind of consumers: those with neophobia stuff, and those who seek variety of flavors and etc. Is that a valid way to classify the consumers, or it's just more like it's good to know?
No, it's extremely important. For example, imagine you've got a new product. Well, very few products are completely new, but new flavor, something unique about it, something maybe that's unusual for your culture you're working in. If you don't select people in terms of their neophobia, you're going to get enormous amounts of variation. And that's simply what it's to do with. Depending on what testing you're doing, there are sources of variation, and we're just trying to track those down. Neophobia, I work in it, as I said, it's increasingly important. For example, we did a study. I did a study with Sarah Yeager, and we found that it has a big impact on self-reported health, physical and mental health.
Mhm.
It's a big influence on diet quality, diet variety, but it's also a big influence on what foods people will find acceptable. People who are highly neophobic actually really don't like eating very much.
Right.
They're anxious about it. They're genuinely anxious about it. Food neophobia is related to neophobia of all sorts. Now, as I said, if you don't know that about people and there's some aspect of novelty in your product, then you're really just ignoring a major source of variation. The other thing is, it's quite difficult to get people across the whole spectrum. People who are genuinely high in neophobia won't volunteer for food testing. Full stop. Full
Right.
stop. They just won't. So in fact, when you see neophobia being measured in a study, often it's actually people who are low in neophobia and maybe moderate, and that's it. Sarah and I do a lot of studies using the internet, and it's the only way we know we can get a full range. But yeah, crucial. You mentioned variety seeking. It's the sort of flip side of it. They're not quite the exact, mirror images of one another. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's another aspect. Sensation seeking. There's,
Right.
for any sort of general quality you can think of, there's probably half a dozen measures, and it's important, I think, to think about, what if you're collecting data on consumers, uh, consider the sort of product or samples you're using. In what ways, what barriers might there be to people saying that's a good product, and how can we measure those barriers?
That after those studies, the let's say I will put this example: the people from the United Kingdom or Australia or whatever country, Japan, it's the same general idea of how they perceive a food. I mean, it's the same procedure, or is it really important to be like tropicalize a product or a questionnaire, sorry, in before doing the research?
Yeah, I think you need to do that. I mean, for a long time now, people have recognized, well, you have to obviously translate
Mm.
the scales and so on. That's a very straightforward thing to
Yeah.
do. You get local input into that. But also, the terminology that we use is not necessarily the right terminology. There are terms that people in some cultures do not use, terms that don't relate to food for them.
Mhm.
Like, we want to ask people, do you like something extremely? Now, in some cultures, well, no, I just like it. It's not to say I like extremely. I like my wife extremely.
Mhm.
Do I like this biscuit extremely? Well, no, it's not relevant. So we have to be conscious of the cultural aspects like that. The other thing is that we, and this comes from our work in Japan from many years ago. You often find that the terminology of sensory qualities or preferences varies according to product.
Mhm.
Okay. And this is true. So, for example, I'm just, just trying to dig up something from the past. I remember that the term crunchiness in Japanese, you used one term for biscuits, a different term for ice, a different term for something else. So there's a lot of language issues, uh, as well as, and with this increasing emphasis on emotions, we have to be very, very careful about the sorts of ways in which people express emotions. I always use the example. It's a silly example, but whereas a French person may say of a product, "Oh, c'est fantastique," and an English person tasting the same product for them the same level of enthusiasm might say, "Well, actually, that's quite good." In
Or
English,
here,
high
right.
high praise. Yeah,
In Mexico, we can say
and so
delicioso.
yeah, you could say delicious, and
Oh.
well, you're from a culture that's a bit more expressive,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
so more like the French in some respects. Yeah,
Right.
so
Okay. Do you think we have finished? Well, not we. I'm not working into that, but people have finished discovering the basic tastes, or fatty metallic will be added quite soon, or oleogustus, I
uh,
guess.
yeah. It's very difficult to know. People have been talking about a fat taste for
Mhm.
for a long time, and I think that we're still a little bit confused as to what, in fact, we're becoming more confused, it seems to me, as to
Right.
what a taste might mean.
Huh.
Is a taste necessarily something that we are conscious of when we pop it in our mouth and
Mhm.
okay, we know it doesn't have a smell, okay, it's got a quality, and we're conscious of that. Does that make it a taste? And maybe it does. I mean, there was the big debate for many years about umami. When I first entered the field, umami was being proposed as a fifth taste, and on average, most people working in the field said, "No, no, no, we don't accept
Impossible.
that. Impossible." Yeah, and in fact, it was the company who makes MSG, Ajinomoto,
Mhm.
that did pushed it by funding so much research that we discovered the genetics of it and the receptor qualities, all sorts of things. And now we recognize it probably is a unique taste.
Right.
We don't know. But here's my guesses. Fat, yes. We may not be conscious of what the particular nature of the quality is, but yeah, probably.
Mhm.
People talk about calcium taste. Who knows?
Yeah.
Metallic, metallic. My best guess is no. It's probably a tactile or somatosensory quality, a
Mhm.
bit like astringency.
Right.
People used to talk about astringency being a taste, and we know it's not. And that would be my guess for metallic as well. But look,
Who knows?
the my view of taste is the traditional one. That is, our taste system is a sensor for nutrients that we either need
Mhm.
or we want to avoid, substances we want to avoid. And so, if we can argue that is the case for other qualities, then maybe they are tastes.
Right. Right. Okay. I'm asking this because I would like to know what was your biggest, let's say, smile or frustration, or maybe I don't know, the best emotion you had after, while writing Taste Matters. What was the best experience into that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I should say to start out with, I had the idea for the book for 15 years,
Mhm.
and the and I knew it would be an interesting book, and there wasn't something similar. And it was I guess, the recognition that, yeah, really, firstly, it does need to be written. Secondly, I could write it because, I'd been a technical writer. I'd written research papers,
Right.
and it's not really necessarily wasn't obvious to me, or maybe to other people, that I could necessarily convey that stuff to a lay audience.
Mhm.
And I think there were two things. One is a colleague of mine, Avery Gilbert, got asked to do a couple of entries for an encyclopedia of food and culture. And he said, look, I don't want to do it. And he said to me, do you want to do it? And I said, well, actually, yeah, why not? Because it's, again, for a generalist audience. And I've found them very short entries, a few pages each. I found them really hard. I mean, really hard to do that. The person next door could read and enjoy, and that got me thinking. Well, yeah, that I can just do a book now. That's it. And the second thing was that I was at a dinner party where the partner of a friend of mine who invited me to a dinner party was. It was a very drunken dinner party, as I recall. Had published a book with a London group called Reaction Books, and he said, "Oh yeah, I had a good experience. I'll introduce you to my editor."
Mm-hmm.
And he did, and the editor said, "Yeah, that sounds good. Write it."
Hmm.
And so that was just luck in some sense, but it was enough to push me over the line. The actual writing of the book, I think, came relatively straightforwardly in the sense that these were topics some of them I'd been teaching, some of them I'd been writing on a bit. And yeah, the difficult thing was finishing it off.
Yeah.
If we think about taste and preferences and all that sort of thing, there are certain topics that sort of have to be there. And then what do you say at the end? I suppose every book now will talk about AI, but when I wrote this, that wasn't a thing, and so I had to sort of push myself a little bit to talk about, sort of, I guess, nutritional issues, which is a little bit beyond my expertise,
Right.
and issues about what causes obesity and so on. And that, I think I got away with it, but it was tricky.
Okay, good. And what advice would you give to the researcher who is starting a career in sensory with tend to a little bit of psychology? What will be their minimum skills?
Well, if they've come, let's say they've come from a food science background, they'll have a set of, their toolbox, as they call it sometimes. I would encourage them to, delve a bit deeper into the background.
Mhm.
If you're measuring emotions, well, read the people who write about emotions, from a theoretical point of view,
Right.
and a sort of more psychological or physiological point of view. Read that background literature so you know what you're dealing with. The same is true with the tests. If you're measuring intensity or measuring liking or measuring discrimination or something like that, learn where these methods came from. If you can, I mean, people are busy, and of course that's difficult. The other thing for young researchers, I guess, two pieces of advice. One is write as much as you can.
Mm.
Write papers.
Right.
Treat it as a thing that you do. Write papers as much as you can, and in doing that, reach out to other people in the field.
Yes.
People, young researchers don't realize this, that people are actually very good and very happy to hear from people who are starting out. One of the best things I did when I started out in this field was, from about the second year I was working in the field, I started to go to a conference in America called ACHEMS, the Association for Chemoreception Sciences. Now, there's a great bunch of people there. It wasn't a huge conference, but I went every year and more or less still do. And there were amazing people from all sorts of different disciplines that were very welcoming. I built up friendships, I built up connections, to the extent where if I had a question about something, I would just email them and say, listen, you work as tell me all about this. And they would happily do it. And there's a great group of people out there in whatever field you're working in who are very happy to help. And so that's important. Establish your worldwide connections, and conferences are probably the best way to do that. And following on from that, as much as you possibly can, collaborate.
Right.
It'll
And
be
don't be
more
shy.
fun. Yeah, don't be shy. Exactly. You'll have more fun if you collaborate.
Right. Good. Do you have well, of course, your book, but do you have a specific paper, poster, book that you can suggest for the people who is now dealing with this or want to go into deep?
Gee, it depends on what they're interested in. There are several handbooks, and most of them in recent years edited by Herb Meiselman. There's a handbook of eating and drinking which came out a couple of years ago. There's a book on consumers from Gaston Ares and Paula Varela. Second edition has just come out. There's a new book called the Comprehensive Handbook of Foods or something, food or eating or something like that. I can't remember. Which is 100 chapters covering every aspect. That's about to come out.
Okay.
Again, Herb Meiselman editing that. But there are all sorts of books. We, together with my colleagues in Italy, we're writing a book based on our course. We do a course every year called Understanding Consumers, and we're writing that into a book. So that will be out probably not for another year, but there are lots of things. And I would suggest to your listeners, if you've got any specific questions about material or topics or anything like that, you can just email me. It's perfectly fine. Please do. Don't be shy.
Okay. If you had to describe your career using only one flavor, texture, or aroma, what would that be?
My career?
Yes.
Pungent.
Pungent. Okay. Thank you. And the final question will be, let's say we have a time machine and you can travel into the past and you could say something to younger John, who didn't know he will work with sensory science as well. What can you tell to him?
Yeah, that's a good thing, and I think about that not just in those terms, but I think about the pathways that you can take. I'm tempted to say, okay, young John, do a degree in business,
Okay.
become a stockbroker, but you won't be poor. But no, if we're talking about this field, I see my career as having been taking up opportunities that I wasn't sure where they would lead. Now, for some people, that's not their personality.
Right.
Some people actually want to concentrate on something and follow it through. And that suits your personality. For me, I think I've been lucky. I think I've been very lucky in that I've taken pathways that have opened up to me and sort of done different things, worked in different areas, and retrospectively, I think that's it suits me, and I think it actually makes things very, very interesting. There's a certain amount of anxiety with that because you don't know where things are necessarily going to lead. Should I do this? Should I do that? But on the other hand, most of the time, there's nothing so dreadful that's going to happen.
Right, the butterfly effect. Yeah,
Exactly. I look at a colleague of mine, a senior colleague called Paul Rosen, and Paul has been very influential in all sorts of fields. Before he did anything to do with food, he was a rat psychologist, studying principles of learning, and he was very successful in that. And then he started talking about flavor principles, and then he started talking about disgust, and then he started talking about other aspects of culture and so on. And he just followed his nose throughout his entire career and had a fantastically successful career and is respected by people. And that suits him. And the other thing is, of course, also, let's not forget that all our research depends on funding, and funding sources are, I don't know, they're changeable, let's say.
Mhm.
And so, following the money in some sense, what is money available for, can actually lead you to some very interesting places and make sure that you're able to do work. I think people need to be open to that, at least to some extent.
Thank you. Thank you. Time flies and we must wrap up this talk. Thank you very much for your time and your willingness to share your story and experiences with us. I'm pretty sure people will enjoy this conversation. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, nothing at all. I think we've covered a lot of very strange things. And but as I said, if your listeners want to contact me, and I'd be happy to correspond with them, and talk to them about whatever.
Perfect. And maybe we can see each other at Merida for next Bangor.
Let's hope so.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, John, and see you next time. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
A ustedes muchas gracias por vernos. Nos vemos en la siguiente ocasión de Diálogos Sensoriales. Si les gustó, denle el link, clic en me gustó. Si no, no digan nada. Nos vemos. Chao, chao. Thank you.